Chapter 11 of The Harbor. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tom Weiss. The Harbor by Ernest Poole. Chapter 11. "Come over here at once." My father's voice over the telephone one morning a few days later sounded thick and unnatural. "What about?" I asked. "Your sister." When I reached the house in Brooklyn he came himself to let me in and took me into the library. I was shocked by his face. It was terribly worn. Quite plainly he had been up all night. As he began speaking his voice shook and he leaned forward, every inch of him tense. Sue had told him the night before that she was going to marry Joe Kramer. In reply to his anxious questions she had given him some of the facts about what Joe was doing, and Dad had stormed at her half the night. "She wants to marry him, Billy," he cried. "She's got her mind set on a man like that. What has he got to support her with? Not a cent, not even a decent job. He's not writing now. Do you know what he's doing? Stirring up strikes. Of the ugliest kind, of the most ignorant class of men, foreigners. I know such strikes, I've fought 'em myself and I know how they're handled. That young man will land in jail, and it's where he belongs. Do you know what he's up to right here on the docks?" "Yes, I know." "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let him come to the house?" "I was doing my best to stop it, Dad." "You were, eh? Well, you'll stop it now. Understand, Billy, he's your friend. You brought him here, way back at the start. You've got to put a stop to this." "But how?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. "What do you think that I can do?" "You can talk to her, can't you? God Almighty! Make her see this will ruin her life." "I can't do that." "Can't you?" He rose and bent over me, gripping my arms, and I felt his violent trembling. "If you don't, it's the end of me," he said. "Steady, Dad. Now steady. This is coming out all right, you know." I got him back into his chair. "I'm going to do all I possibly can. I'm going to see Joe Kramer now. He's the only one who can influence her. I'm going to get him to come to Sue and help me make her feel what's ahead, the hardest, ugliest parts of his life. Now promise me you'll keep out of it. Promise you'll leave her alone while I'm gone." He agreed to this at last and I left him. But as I went into the hall Sue came to me from the other room. Her face was white and strained. "Well, Billy?" she said. My throat tightened. She looked so pitifully worn. "I'm sorry, Sue." "Is that all you have to say to me?" She cut in with a quick catch of her breath. "No, no." I took her in my arms. "Dear old Sue, don't you know how I feel? I want to see you happy. I'm trying to see what on earth we can do." "Why can't you all leave me alone?" she demanded in low, broken tones. "That's all I want. I'm old enough. I love him. Isn't that enough? To be treated like this, like a bad little child. If you'd been here and heard him, Dad, I mean, I tell you he's half out of his mind. I'm afraid to be left alone with him." "Sue?" It was our father's voice. He had come out close behind us. "Leave me alone!" Sue started back, but he caught her arm. "You'll stay right here with me till he comes." "Till who comes?" "Kramer." "Who said he was coming?" "Your brother." "Billy!" "Now, Sis, I'm going to talk to Joe and try to persuade him to see you and me together. That's all, quietly, over in our apartment." "No," said our father. "He'll see her right here." "Now, Dad." "Careful, son, don't get in my way. I'm standing about as much as I can. Kramer is to come right here. If there's any seeing Sue to be done, it's to be in her home, where she belongs. I won't let her out of it, not for an hour out of my sight." "You'll lock me in here?" she panted. He turned on her. "You can call the police if you want to." He let go his hold and turned to me. "I'm thinking of her mother. If she sees this man at all again, I'll see him too." "Can't you leave us?" I implored her. "Sue, please, go to your room." When she'd gone I tried to quiet him. And now that Sue was out of the way I partly succeeded. But he stuck to his purpose. Joe must come and see Sue here. "I want to be on hand when she sees him," he insisted. "I don't want to talk, I've done all that. I won't say a word, but I want to be here. You think you know her better than I do because you're younger, but you don't. We lived right here together. She's been my chum for 25 years, and I know things about her you don't know. She's willful. She's as wild as a hawk, but she can't hold out. She hasn't it in her. She will if you act as you did just now. But I won't, he said sharply. That was a mistake, and I won't let it happen again. When he comes, you do the talking, boy. And if we're beaten, I won't try to keep her. She goes, and it's ended. I promise you that. But, son, don't make any mistake about this. I have an influence over this girl that you haven't got, and nobody has. I want her to feel me beside her. He went over this again and again, and with this I had to leave him. I found Joe in his office. He rose abruptly when I came in and reached for his hat. "Let's go out for a walk," he said. Down in the street he turned on me. "Sue has just phoned me you were there. She thought you were going to help her, Bill. She thought that you'd stand by her. She didn't get any sleep last night. She's been through hell with that father of hers." "Oh, I've been all through Sue's sufferings, Joe. Don't give me any more of that." "You mean you think she's faking?" "No, but to be good and brutally frank about it, what she suffers just now doesn't count with me. It's what her whole life may be with you." "That's not exactly your business, is it?" "It wouldn't be if I didn't know Sue." "What do you know?" "I know that in spite of all her talk and the way she acts and honestly feels whenever she's with you," I replied, "Sue wants to hang on to her home and us. She isn't the heroic kind. She can't just follow along with you and leave all this she's used to." Joe's face clouded a little. "She'll get over that," he muttered. "Perhaps she will, and perhaps she won't. How do you know? You want to know, don't you? You want her to be happy?" "No, that's not what I want most. Being happy isn't the only thing." "Then tell her so. That's all I ask. I'll tell you what I've come for, Joe. You've always been more honest, more painfully blunt and open than any man I've ever known. Be that way now with Sue. Give her the plainest, hardest picture you can of the life you're getting her into." "I've tried to do that already." "You haven't. If you want to know what you've done, I can tell you. You've painted up this life of yours, and all these things you believe in, with power enough and smash enough to knock holes through all I believe in myself. And I'm stronger than Sue. You've done more to her. What I ask of you now is to drop all the fire and punch of your dreams, and line out the cold facts of your life on its personal side. What it's going to be. I'll help draw it out by asking you questions." "What's the use of that? I know it won't change her." "Maybe it won't. But if it won't, at least it'll make my father give up. Can't you see? If you and I together, I asking and you answering, paint your life the way it's to be, and she says, 'Good, that's what I want,' he'll feel she's so far away from him then that he'll throw up his hands and let her go. He can rest then. We can help him then, Eleanore and I. It may save the last years of his life. And Sue will be free to come to you." "You mean the more ugly we make it, the better?" "Just that. Let's end this one way or the other." "All right. I agree to that." When Joe and I came into the library, my father rose slowly from his chair, and the two stood looking at one another. And by some curious mental process two memories flashed into my mind. One was of the towering sails that my father had told me he had seen on his first day on the harbor, when coming here a crude boy from the inland he had thrilled to the vision of owning such ships with crews to whom his word should be law, and of sending them over the ocean world. Such was the age he had lived in. The other was of the stokers down in the bottom of the ship, and Joe's tired frowning face as he said, "Yes, they look like a lot of bums, and they feed all the fires at sea." What was there in common between these two? To each age a harbor of its own. "Well, young man, what have you to say to me?" "Nothing." Sue came into the room. Briefly I explained to her what our father had agreed upon, that she was to do the deciding and that he would abide by her decision. Then I began my questions to Joe. I felt awkward, painfully the intruder into two other people's lives, and I felt as though I were operating upon the silent old man close by. The uglier, the better, I kept repeating to myself. Let's take up first the money side, Joe. Have you any regular salary? No. Such as it is, where does it come from? Out of the stokers. How much do you get? 1 week, $20, and another 10 or 5, he said. 1 week I got $3.87. Is that likely to grow steadier? Possibly. More likely, worse. But can two of you live on pay like that, say an average of $10 a week? I know several millions of people that have to, and most of them have children, too. And you'd expect to live like that? No better, was his answer. My father turned to him slowly, as though he had not heard just right. But as a matter of fact, I went on, you wouldn't have to, would you? You'd expect Sue to earn money as well as yourself. I hope so, if she wants to. It's my idea of a woman's life. And the work you hope she'll enter will be the kind you believe in, organizing labor and taking an active part in strikes? Yes, she's a good speaker. I see. And if you were out of a job at times, you'd be willing to let her support you? Sue angrily half rose from her chair, but Joe, with a grim move of his hand, said softly, Sit down and try to stand this. Let's get it over and done with. Then he turned quietly back to me. Why, yes, I'd let her support me, he said. You mean you don't care one way or the other? You'd both be working for what you believe in, and how you lived wouldn't especially count. That's about it. What do you believe in, Joe? Just briefly, what's your main idea in stirring up millions of ignorant men? Mainly to pull down what's on top. As for instance? All of it. Business, industry, and finance as it's being run at present. A clean sweep? And in place of that? Everything run by the workers themselves. For example, I asked, the ships by the stokers? Yes, the ships by the stokers, he said. And I felt Dad stiffen in his chair. As they will be when the time comes, Joe added. How soon will that be? I'll see it, he said. The working people in full control. No restraints whatever from above. There won't be anyone left above. No more gods, he answered. Not even one? Is there one? He asked. You're an atheist, aren't you? I said. Yes, when I happen to think of it. And Sue would likely be the same. Isn't she now? He inquired. I dropped the point and hurried on. How about Sue's friends, Joe? In a life like that, always in strikes, she'd have to give them up, wouldn't she? Probably. Some of them think they're radicals, but I doubt if they'd come far out of the parlor. So her new friends would be either strikers or the people who lead in strikes. Her life would be practically sunk in the mass. I hope so. You may be in jail at times. Quite probably. Sue too? Possibly. I caught the look in my father's face and knew that I had but a few moments more. Do you want to marry her, Joe? I asked. Yes. I'll go down to City Hall if a large fat Tammany alderman can make our love any cleaner. You mean you don't believe in marriage? Not especially, he said. And so if either gets sick of the other, he just leaves without any fuss? Naturally. There was a pause, and then Joe spoke again. You're a better interviewer than I thought you were, he said. You've made the picture quite complete, as far as you can see it. Of course, you've left all the real stuff out. What is the real stuff, as you call it, young man? My father's voice had a deadly ring. Joe turned and looked at him as before. You couldn't understand, he said. I think I understand enough. Dad rose abruptly and turned to Sue. Sue, he said, shall I ask your anarchist friend to go? I could feel Sue gather herself. She was white. I'll have to go with him, she managed to say. A slight spasm shot over our father's face. For a moment there was silence. You've heard all he said of this life of his.
Yes.
And what he wants and expects you to do?
I heard it.
And just how he wants you to live, with nothing you've been used to, nothing. No money but what a few drunken stokers throw your way, no decent ideals, no religion, no home? Again a pause.
I want to go with him, she brought out at last.
Dad turned sharply and left the room.
I heard a deep breath behind me. It came from Joe Kramer, whose face was set in a frown of pain.
"He's so damn old," Joe muttered. "You operated on him hard."
Suddenly Sue threw herself on the lounge. She huddled there shaking and motioned us off.
"Leave me alone, can't you? Go away," we heard between her sobs.
"It's all right. I'm ready. I'll come to you, Joe. But not now. Not just now. Go away, both of you. Leave me alone."
Joe left the house. Soon after that Eleanore arrived and I told her what had happened. She went in to Sue. I left them together and went up to my father's room. He lay on the bed, breathing quickly. "You did splendidly, son," he said. "You slashed into her hard. It hurt me to listen, but it's all right. Let her suffer. She had to. It hit her, I tell you. She'll break down. If we can only keep her here. Get Eleanore." He stopped with a jerk, his hand went to his heart, and he panted and scowled with pain. "I sent for her," I told him. "She's come, and she's in Sue's room now. Let's leave them alone. It's going to be all right, Dad." I sent for a doctor who was an old friend of my father's. He came and spent a long time in the room, and I could hear them talking. At last he came out. "It won't do," he said. "We can't have any more of this. We must keep your sister out of his sight. She can't stay alone with him in this house, and she can't go now to your anarchist friend. If she does, it may be the end of your father. Suppose you persuade her to come to you." But here Eleanore joined us. "I have a better plan," she said. "I've been talking to Sue and she has agreed. She's to stay and we'll move over here and try to keep Sue and her father apart." "What about Joe?" I asked her. "Sue has promised me not to see Joe until the strike is over. It will only be a matter of weeks, perhaps even days. It may break out tomorrow. It's not much of a time for Joe to get married. Besides, it's the least she can do for her father, to wait that long. And she has agreed. So that much is settled." She went home to pack up a few things for the night. When she came back, it was evening. She spent some time with Sue in her room while I stayed in with my father. I gave him a powder the doctor had left and he was soon sleeping heavily. At last in my old bedroom Eleanore and I were alone. It was a long time before we could sleep. "Funny," said Eleanore presently, "how thoroughly selfish people can be. Here's Sue and your father going through a perfectly ghastly crisis. But I haven't been thinking of them, not at all. I've been thinking of us. Of you, I mean. Of what this strike will do to you. You're getting so terribly tense these days." I reached over and took her hand. "You don't want me to run away from it now?" "No," she said quickly. "I don't want that. I've told you that I'm not afraid." "Then we'll have to wait and see, won't we, dear? We can't help ourselves now. I've got to keep on writing, you know. We depend on that for our living. And I can't write what I did before. I don't seem to have it in me. So I'm going into this strike as hard as I can. I'm going to watch it as hard as I can and think it out as clearly. I know I'll never be like Joe. But I do feel now I'm going to change. I've got to, after what I've been shown. The harbor is so different now. Don't you understand?" I felt her hand slowly tighten on mine. "Yes, dear," she said. "I understand." End of chapter 11. Recording by Tom Weiss.